Hello and happy Easter. Today we're going to be talking about our Lenten season this year. It was very unique. Um, we're in Littleton, Colorado today, and I'm thinking, oh, it's always nice to have a white Christmas, but we are actually having a white Easter here. It's snowing outside, so it's kind of interesting. The priests were wearing white during the live stream of Mass, and we have a white Easter, so kind of cool. Um, we live in unprecedented times, and I know that this Lent season was very unique with the coronavirus. And my reflection, especially on Easter, with the culmination of our Lent, is um, about how it parallels with the coronavirus timeline. So, our Ash Wednesday started this year on February 26th. The first recorded death of coronavirus in the United States was February 29th. And as soon as that happened, we had stay-at-home orders. And the goal of the stay-at-home orders wasn't to cure the coronavirus. It was to flatten the curve, as everyone has, I guess now, hopefully understood what that means. Basically, we all know we're going to get sick. It's just we're trying to get sick over time so we don't overwhelm the healthcare system. And we apparently reached the peak of our curve right around Good Friday, which is the peak of our Lenten season. The most suffering on Earth with in the United States with the coronavirus almost exactly mirrors the most suffering that we believe as Catholics happened with Jesus' passion and the Stations of the Cross and his crucifixion. So, Lent and Ash Wednesday and first death of coronavirus almost all at the same time. The peak of our suffering almost times perfectly with the peak of Christ's suffering. Just an amazing parallel. So, Lent season starts with Ash Wednesday, and Ash Wednesday is literally a reminder for us that we're mortal. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And with the coronavirus happening around the world, in the United States, it's really shocking to us that there are so many deaths occurring. I think we are close to 20,000 deaths in the United States, if not more by now. And that's just shocking. But we forget that there are 330 million people in the United States. We forget that there are almost 8 billion people on the planet. And we also we do everything we can to forget that the death rate is 100. Well, 99.9999999. You don't count Christ. And when we hear numbers that are so huge, it's shocking. I think it was Churchill who said, one death is a tragedy and a million deaths is a statistic. And that's kind of how it feels. So from January 1st to April 1st, there were 46,000 deaths from coronavirus around the world. But there were 121,000 deaths from seasonal flu. There were 270,000 deaths from suicide. There were 338,000 deaths from car accidents. There were 2 million deaths from cancer and 10 million from abortion. So those numbers are staggering, but we are all going to die one day. And that's exactly what we're called to remember on Ash Wednesday. And that's we're forced to face it a little more this year with the coronavirus happening. So we have Ash Wednesday, and then we have our 40-day Lenten season, which is mirrored with Christ's 40 days in the desert, where he's tempted by the devil. So as soon as Ash Wednesday happens, and then the first coronavirus death, we have statewide, countrywide lockdowns happening, and we aren't allowed to go any place unless it's an essential service. So what are we really called to do during Lent? A lot of people think of Lent as like the Catholic New Year's resolution. it can be that way, but it's really a way for us to get closer to Christ. So, whereas a New Year's resolution, I might say, I want to lose 20 pounds because it'll make me feel good. In Lent, that's the wrong attitude. We shouldn't be like, I'm going to eat healthy so I feel better. It's, I'm going to eat healthy so so I'm not tempted by gluttony, because that's getting in the way of my relationship with Christ. A New Year's resolution might be, I'm going to stop drinking a cup of coffee each morning. I don't think a cup of coffee is getting in the way with your relationship with Christ. It's really what is in the way. I think for most of us, especially during modern times, it's too much idle time, too much computer time, too much social media, too much Netflix, and not enough prayer. So I think for most people, myself included, a good Lent means praying more and eliminating the things that are taking you away from a relationship with Christ. And when you do that, you'll know every Lent you're tempted. You're right away, as soon as you sit down to do your first rosary, you're tempted to do something else. Oh, I can do it tomorrow. And that's why we have Jesus' example in the desert to look towards, and he has 3 specific temptations that he's tempted with. And the first is to turn stone into bread. And Jesus has a famous line where he tells the devil, man does not live by bread alone. And shocker, again, a perfect example during the coronavirus lockdown. Essential services are takeout food and grocery stores, not church. There have been churches around the country that have had services where they are doing social distancing, at least 6 feet apart, not as many people in the congregation as possible, as normal, and they're being shut down because they're not an essential service. But we don't live by bread alone. I'm not saying what the Catholic Church in canceling masses is wrong. I'm saying for us as individuals, we need to make sure that we are taking that spiritual communion, building our relationship with Christ, instead of focusing on the quote-unquote essentials so much. The second temptation is testing God. The devil tells Jesus to jump off a cliff, basically, and God will save you. And that can be exemplified during this specific Lent with, I'll go to the grocery store, or I'll be a little less careful because God will protect me. But remember, our mortality rate is 100%. We're all mortal. We're all going to die. And the great thing about being a believer is we know that death is at the end. It will continue, but we shouldn't be careless with our lives and those of our loved ones because we think God will protect us. We shouldn't be testing God that way. And the final temptation is the allure for power and materialism. And I think this is shown during modern times in the fact that we allegedly had the largest economy, the most booming economy we've ever had in the history of the world. And in a matter of a few days, it was completely shattered. And on an individual basis, so many of us live just paycheck to paycheck. And I think that we're not called to do that. We're not called to spend every dime that we have on ourselves, so that when something throws a wrench into the system, we're completely thwarted. So hopefully people learn this lesson when the economy gets back going, that materialism and power isn't the end all be all. It's not even close. It's good to put some pennies away and build your relationship with your family, with Christ. Building those relationships are a lot more important than the materialism that we all, myself included, are tempted to. So crazy parallels. So we start with Ash Wednesday, we have our temptations and trying to build a relationship with Christ. And then we have the peak of our suffering with the coronavirus coinciding with the passion of Christ. And today is Easter Sunday, and we hear these stories that the disciples are running towards Christ's tomb because they've heard that he's gone. And it kind of feels like Jesus is gone right now. We don't have the Eucharist. We aren't going to church. And I think most of us have spent the Lenten season just binge watching TV shows, doing everything we can to distract us from the suffering of the world, watching the news nonstop, things like that, where we're supposed to not be eating bread, but spiritual bread, spiritual communion, praying more, things like that. We had plenty of time to do this. All of our distractions were removed, and we had an opportunity during this Lent season to build our relationship with Christ with more prayer instead of distractions. And so, did you use the opportunity, or are you starting from scratch? Do you feel that Christ is gone because it's your own doing? Because you spent all of this time when you had plenty to pray by distracting yourself? Or do you feel that Christ really is present because you spent your Lenten season building your relationship with Christ? So those are my reflections. I feel like I had an okay Lent, but I wish I would have thought of some of this stuff a little earlier during my Lenten season. And happy Easter, and God bless.